In this video, I'm going to look at a web page, an HTML page with some radio buttons, and I'm going to use some JavaScript to respond to their various actions, grab values from them, and what have you. I'm going to have sort of three different versions and sort of increasing sophistication. So this will be version 1. The code for this example can be found at the URL seen here. So it's a simple example of just using radio buttons to choose a size. And so I have 4 radio buttons with small, medium, large, and extra large sizes. And we can see here, I refreshed the page and small was pre-selected. And let me close it and reopen it in the live server. And so small is pre-selected, but I can change the options and I can choose the size by clicking the button. So then it's grabbing the size, it's displaying it here in an alert. It is putting it on the page. If I change the size, it clears out the choice, but I can re-choose it. The button I think I might have some console logging here. This is my console. Right now the button is disabled, but if I change the choice, then there was some console that was in the change event or in the probably the click event of the radio button. And then in the click of the button, that's where I have the alert to change the page, but also, so this just single L, that was, I believe, the radio button event, whereas the you chose in the console is the radio button click event. So I have both events of the radio buttons and of the button. Okay, so that's what it looks like. So now let's see what it looks like in code. So here's my HTML page. Here is the head. So I have the doc type, the HTML, I have the head tag. Typically in previous examples, I've had my style here in an open style and a closed style. But instead, in this case, I have a link tag that links to a file where all the CSS is contained. And I never do a lot of styles. So in this case, I'm calling it not underscore much CSS, so not much style. But over here is my style. And again, so style can be between style tags in the head of the page, at the top of the page. It can be a link to, as we're doing now. And you can also write style tags in individual elements, like inline on the page. So I could put some style here, style. That should be an equal. I can put it inline here, like color is red. That would be the font color. So if I were to do that, save that, and refresh the page, there it is. The header is now red, which looks terrible. But so I could put style, as I had in previous examples, in between style tags up here. I can put them in an external file that I link to, or I could put them here, sort of inline in an individual element here. I don't like it, so I'm taking it out. Okay, so, but here is that not much CSS. So the body had a color, background color, and a color, and a font family, and the padding, the div in the input. We gave a little space on the top so they're not too jammed together. The input is, in this case, the radio buttons are inputs. Let me go back over here. So what are inputs in this case? The radio buttons are inputs, and so is the button. The button can be a button tag, open button, close button, but I'm using an input of the button type. So when I style input, I'm styling both the button and the radio, and then I can make style based on some attribute and distinguish between those inputs. So I made the font weight bold and the padding 0.5 EM. But now here I'm specifically styling of type button. So I sort of reversed my color scheme, which I often do, and give it a specific width and a border radius. So the button should be a bit rounded. So that's that rounding. The input of the button hover, I switch the colors yet again. So this is a pseudo class. This is sort of like a state when my mouse is over. I switch the colors. So that's the styling of the button. I have a styling of the label. So the radio buttons are connected to, associated with the labels. So the words are in a label. So the radio button is just the little circle. So the radio button is just this little circle. And then to tell the user what's going on, we have a label. And so I have some styling of that label. I give it an inline block, which means it can share the line with the radio button. That's what the inline means, and the block means I can give it a width and so on. So I'm just giving a specific width. I gave it a border radius, so it's also rounded like the button was, and gave it some padding. And then here's some additional styling of the input of the radio type, which is checked. And then I'm not styling the radio button, but the thing next to it. So this is saying in CSS, saying go find the input, which is of the radio type, which happens to be checked. So some state of the radio button, not all the radio buttons, but just a checked radio button. And with the radio buttons, I should have said that way at the beginning. Radio buttons are, by definition, they give you, there's a set of choices and you can make at most one of them. It's possible to maybe have none of the choices selected, but then it's at most one after that. Okay. But this is saying go to the page, find an input, which is of the type radio, find a radio that happens to be checked, and then go to its sibling, which if its sibling is a label, then this is just a slightly different shade. So I think up there it's goldenrod, and here I have gold. So that's a slightly different color. And you can see that here, that the selected radio button is a slightly different color. Another thing that we'll get into when we look at the HTML rather than the styling is, but while I'm running it here, you can see that as I can click either on the radio button or I can click on the label, and they both have the same effect. And so that is a built-in thing, provided I do the right thing in the HTML, which I'm going to show you. Okay. Now I didn't save this little one here because it was still that red header. And that's because I never saved. I like put it in and saved it and showed it to you, and then took it out, but didn't save it. So that's why it's still red. So I'm going to save, but that little one there is indicating that I didn't, that the file's unsaved. So I'll save it and then come out here and refresh it. And it's still red. I thought I took it out. Oh, am I saving? Did I save the wrong thing? I saved. Let me save all. That would be better. I think I was on the CSS page and hit save, but the change was in the HTML page. And so that wasn't saved because I said save one file, and the file I was saving was the CSS. Of course, the change I wanted to get rid of was in the HTML. But there's also a save all, so that was a better choice than I made. But okay, now it's, and I don't even think I hit refresh. I think it's making the update as soon as it was saved. So let's test that idea. So let's go back to the ugly red. And save it. And I didn't refresh it, but it updated. And that's sort of a feature of the live server, that it does some updating without saving. Okay, so let me at least choose black and save that. Okay, so that was fun. Okay, so we showed you, again, the style was linked to this time. So sort of this more separation of style from HTML, and then in another version, we'll sort of separate most of the JavaScript. Okay, so let me shrink up my head. So here's the body. I have the header. Now, the next thing comes is the set of radio buttons, our main topic in this video. Let me get rid of that. So here is the input is of the radio type. It has an ID, and it has a name, and it has a value, and it has a checked, and in this case, it has an on click. So it has a lot of pieces. So let's understand these pieces. So input just means something that the user is going to interact with, and there are a number of types like text and number and date and color and all sorts of things. Email, but this type is going to be radio. And built into radio is that the user is going to choose one of the choices, or you're only allowed to choose one at a time. So you're choosing from a set. So the set is defined by the name attribute. That name provides a grouping. And so these radio buttons are all to do with the user choosing the size are all given the name rad size. So the sort of grouping of the radio buttons. The grouping of the radio buttons is important because you can only pick one from the group. So we need to know what the group is. There may be a page with more than one set of radio buttons. So we need to know that I can choose one from this group and one from that group. This example only has one group. But again, the group is identified by the name. Okay, if you were doing something like a server-side thing connected to your HTML, the name also plays a role when you're working with server-side languages like PHP or Python. Okay, but here the purpose of the name, just within the context of HTML, is this grouping function within the radio buttons. Okay, I'm giving them an ID. I'm going to work with them as a group and just pick the one that the user selected. So I'm not going to tend to work with them individually, but I gave it an ID because then that is how I connect it to the label. So here's my input with an ID of rad small, and then here's my label, and I use the attribute for rad small, and that creates this connection between this radio button input and this label that says the word small. So again, that led to this behavior where I can click on the label or I can click on the radio button, and it has the same effect. That is that the radio button had an ID and that the label had a for, and those things matched, including case. And then there was a break, so then I move on to a new line. And I do the same thing for medium, the input and the label, for the large, the input and the label, and for the extra large. And I sort of went over, I mentioned, but didn't talk about chat or the value. The value's what we use behind the scenes. So small is what you will see. This smallest thing that's in the label, that's what you will see on the page. But this value here, S, is what gets passed behind the scenes. And that's what the purpose of the value. And then we have here a checked property. And that is what sort of, so we saw when we opened up the page that small was pre-selected, and that was caused by this checked equals checked. And you can only check one of them. So if I were to put this checked equals checked in all of my radio buttons, then I think it would be the last one that would be the checked one, because if I had small checked and then I came and I made medium and I checked it, then it would uncheck the first one, because radio buttons are a group and I can only choose one of them. Okay, here's my button input, type button, ID button click, values, what the button says, choose size, and I'm doing the old fashioned on click to connect it to a function handle button. Oh, I also had the click of the radio buttons all connecting to a handle radio button click, and I have in the parentheses this. So I'm sending them some, by the word this, it will provide some information about which radio. So same radio button is going, all the radio buttons are going to the same function. And this will help me know when I get over to that function, which radio button was selected, if I need to know that. Okay, so here is the button. I'm doing the old-fashioned on-click, connecting it to handle button. So I owe you two functions, one for handling the radio button click, one for handling the button click. And I have a div to display my result. That's the end of my page. Here's my script. And let's just do this. So here's my script and there's the body. So again, the script is at the bottom of the page. I am enabling, by setting the disable property false, I'm enabling the button. So if it was for any previous reason in some previous operation of the page, disabled, if I refresh the page, it will be enabled. Here's the function for handling the button. And again, I'm going to have 3 versions of this. So this is a version of handling these radio buttons. So I'll do it a different way in my later examples. But I'm going to have, I want to know what the user input was, which radio button was selected and what was its value. So I declare a variable for that called user input. Here in 48, I'm going to start looping over my radio buttons, my group of radio buttons. So I'm working with document get elements by name. Before, in my previous examples, if you're sort of following this series, we've worked with get element by ID, which is a single thing, and we've gotten elements by tag name. This is get elements by name. So the radio buttons were grouped by the name, and we also in code in JavaScript sort of grab them as an entire array of things based on that name. So this is an array of radio buttons, and then length says how many of them there are. So there were 4. So this is going to up to 0 and up to, but not including 4, going up by 1s. And we're asking if the ith radio button, so our counter is I, our index is I. So we're going to that array of radio buttons. We're getting the ith element of the radio button, and we're asking if it's checked. Now the checked here in code, so the checked in design is telling me which one is pre-selected, which was small. But once if the user checks another one, then this checked is grabbing the state of who happens to be checked sort of dynamically, it's not stuck at small. Okay, so I'm looping through them all. If it is checked, then I'm going to grab the value of that ith radio button, and that was the S or the M or the L or the XL, the value. And I'm also grabbing the label. So in JavaScript, you can have access, you're interacting with HTML, and HTML has this tree structure and has this concept of parent and child and sibling. And so this is saying, go to the radio button, the one that happened to be checked, but go to that radio button and get its next sibling, which was a label, and then get its inner HTML. So get the word. So this is a way to get So say I had chosen medium, then the value would be M, but this next element sibling.innerHTML would be medium spelled out. Okay, so that's a way to grab the letter and the spelled out word. But this next element sibling is very much tied into the way it was written up here. So here's my medium, that's the one I was talking about, that the label is after the radio button. So it is the next sibling. There's another way to work to get labels and radio buttons to work together, and that's to put this open label in front of the input. And that's another way, without using the for, that's another way to connect the label to the radio button by having the sort of radio button be a child of the label. That's another way to make the connection. And that would ruin this, because this assumes that the label is the next sibling. So you don't have, if you weren't interested in that, then you could do the label to radio button connection sort of either way. But if you want to be able to grab the text as well as the value, then you want the label to be the next sibling. Because you don't have access, you typically have access to children. You don't always have, you can figure out who the parent is. But if you did it the other way, it would just be less control, more difficult to get a hold of the word spelled out. So that's part of the reason for it. Part of the reason I made the choice above. Okay, so I looped through it. I should probably break out of this loop to be a little bit more efficient. I didn't. There was only 4 of them, but I should be a better coder. I'm alerting the label and the input. I'm console logging the label and the input, and I'm updating the page. So I'm changing the inner HTML, and I'm disabling the button. So once you make a choice, you cannot, the button is disabled. But here's the radio button click event. And if they click on any of the radio buttons, then I'm clearing out the answer, and then I'm setting the disabled property of the button to false so I can click again, and I'm console logging. And there I am at the bottom of the page. So I will leave it at that, and thank you for your attention.